His outline to us stated, to help curate a dynamic discussion, I propose starting by gauging the audience's background. Who currently works in the cannabis industry? Okay. Anybody involved in the hemp-derived low-dose market? Okay. Okay. Are you interested? This is a follow-up question for those involved in the low-dose market. Are you interested in transitioning to the adult use market? Oh, you started there. Okay. And the last one on this little outline is, do you have familiarity with 280E and its implications for the adult use market? Okay, so we're not going into 280E today. Do you want to do 280E? No, it's not fun. It's not fun. Okay, so yeah, the IRS code 280E. Yeah, we can nerd out on that, but let's skip the deep in the weeds stuff and let's talk about something you might actually be interested in. I'm really interested in this panel. My name is Drew Emmer. I'm head of strategic relationships. It's a really high profile job at Boveda. Boveda makes little bags of water that keep cannabis fresh. You may have seen them, the little brown packets that have a humidity percentage printed on them. We have a booth out here. We're thrilled to support everything that Steve does with Canna Connect, and we're excited to have the cannabis market come alive in our home state of Minnesota. The panel is awesome. If you want a depth of, I'll just give you a little overview and then I'll hand it off to them for the details of their own personal introduction. But if you wanted to know anything about genetics, we have the guy. If you want to know anything about the retail world, selling cannabis online, SEO, search engine optimization, I hate acronyms. We'll try to spell out every acronym that comes up in this discussion. We have the guy for that. And we have a guy that has been involved in roughly 30 different businesses across all the markets in the cannabis industry. They're in the distribution business as investors and advisors. They're in the dispensary business as investors and advisors. They've interacted with the legal world, the regulatory world. I mean, we've got between these three characters up here, we've got it all covered. So let's start with Stephan Egan, the genetics guy, and I'll hand off the mic and you can tell us your short introduction.
How's it going, guys? As you said, I'm Stephan Egan. I've been working in this space for the last decade or so since I retired from active duty service with JSOC. Started in the cultivation and breeding side, then moved into extraction refinements, still breeding during that time. But that's been a lot of my focus is genetics and extraction refinements. How do we utilize genetics to maximize that extraction after the fact? Been developing the genetics again, selling them through seed banks internationally since about 2017. Had the pleasure of working in every recreational legal state in the country to include the Netherlands, Germany, and Italy.
Hey everyone, my name is Jeremy. I got my start in 2008 in cannabis when Michigan legalized on the medical side. Worked for about 10 years in the caregiver market there. In between, got a degree and started working in the software space as my real job. That was not very fun, but growing weed was more fun. Did that until 2018, software and cannabis, when Michigan went recreational. And then I helped open a couple of the first stores in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan where I live today. And now I'm back to software and helping people sell cannabis online in state licensed markets.
Awesome. I'm Colin Kelly. I've been in the legal cannabis industry for about 10 years now. I was, I guess, the first employee at Leafline Labs, which is one of the 2 licensees for medical here in the state. Served on their board as well. And right now, for about 6 years now, I've been a partner at Merida Capital. So we're the largest PE private equity fund in the cannabis space, invested about $380 million into the industry across 97 different companies. But I'm responsible for about 30 of them. And so I have actually helped build about 30 different cannabis companies in like 16 or 17 different markets, overseeing the transition from medical to adult use in about a dozen of them. Everything from cultivation to, manufacturing and retail and brands, and run across some amazing people like this gentleman. I will say Jeremy he's like the primary voice when I go on LinkedIn. He's one of the voices that I go to look to for good content in his area of expertise. So pretty excited I get to speak with him today.
And we've done some great work together in the past.
We have.
I forgot about that part.
Oh yeah.
You want to talk about that for a second? Grab the mic.
Sure. I mean, one of the groups that Colin invested in early on was in Michigan. It was called 315, and I kind of joined at the end of that. 315 Primo in Missouri is still a thing, but I came on to help that company build out a custom online environment, because most of, back in 2020, 2021, when I joined, all of the options for software were basically standard iframe menus that you could get up and running. So I came on to help those guys build out something custom. Unfortunately, 3+ months into me planning that out, 315 got acquired by Skymint, so that whole project got canceled. The money guys stopped me. But long story short, that landed me where I'm at today, which was actually helping to build software for dispensaries to sell online in a way that was up to modern standards, not something that was an iframe, something that was native to your website, something like you would expect to see when you sign up for Shopify.com. So that's where I'm at today. And now we cover e-commerce, loyalty, and marketing automation. So everything from selling online to powering loyalty programs to doing marketing automations with email, text, SMS, even direct mail.
So our goal, according to Steve's outline, our goal is to foster a compare and contrast discussion between the low-dose hemp-derived market and the adult-use recreational cannabis market. We want the audience to understand, and this is the payoff pitch right here, we want the audience to understand the challenges of profitability in the adult-use market. The challenge of profitability. So our company serves cannabis producers and distributors in all the legal markets. And in the beginning, everything was based on compassionate care. And the ethics behind cannabis, when it's based in compassionate care, are pretty solid. But every time adult use legalization has been enacted in any of those medical markets, the medical patients have lost out, at least in the short term, because every time, like when California went legal, if you're a patient, you couldn't get your medicine. When Nevada went legal, you're a patient, you couldn't get your medicine. Anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks. In some cases, it was a few months. When you're relying on medicine and you're not able to get it, it's a pretty serious situation. When Canada went adult use, there was a dramatic shortage in the medical market, and they had a very well-developed compassionate care program in Canada. So when you ask the question about making it being profitable in the adult use market, it begs a bigger question that I'd love to hear your perspective on, as far as it's really not just about making a profit. Although if you're going to run a business and be sustained in a business, you got to make a profit. But for this industry to grow and thrive and for people to heal, there has to be a bigger ethic behind it than making money. And I'd love to hear, I met, I won't say your name out loud, Sally, But I met a woman out on the floor of the conference today, and she was talking about her interest in the industry because her son's going to get involved. And I really want to know, you're starting from scratch. Let's take Minnesota as an example. If you want to expand on that with your experience in Michigan and elsewhere, go for it. But let's have a chat for just a few minutes about what's it going to take, where are you going to start, how are you going to succeed in Minnesota?
It's a loaded question. So I've had the pleasure of consulting nationally for the last 7 years now. And I've gone into failing businesses, resurrected them, gone into failing businesses that continued failing. And ultimately, it's a wide variety of issues. But I think a lot of people don't understand that first and foremost, this is a degrading product, right? From the moment of harvest to the moment of sale, that product is degrading rapidly. So you have to move it quickly. It's got no shelf life. First and foremost, right? Secondly, supply chain is an issue because there's no meso or micro license that's going to be able to cultivate enough product to have their shelves stocked all the time. So you're going to be looking to other companies to bring in those products to stock your shelves. And then you're talking overhead. So when we're looking at startup companies, right, the average cost is what, $400 to $600 per square foot of cultivation space. Think about that. $400 to $600 per square foot for cultivation. So you're looking at a micro license, 5,000 square foot canopy. You're at $1 million right out the gate just for your cultivation facility, right? So that's a big nut to cover. And then we're looking at retail spots. There's another $500,000 to $1 million in revenue or money that's needed to build out those facilities. So you need to have a bank account first and foremost, or access to money. Secondly, I think most people would agree that right now product needs to be in a shiny packaged container. Consumerism is consumerism. So genetics are great. Flavor is fantastic. But at the end of the day, if the package looks good, the consumer is going to buy it. That's been my experience.
I'll start with, Drew, you mentioned like, what is the bigger picture and what's the bigger part of it, not just profitability. I think that's where everyone should start, is their why. For me personally, I grew up in cannabis. My parents were, the politically correct term at this point in time is legacy operators. And I grew up in a situation. There's plenty of other names too. We could go through them, but I grew up in a situation where both of my parents were in and out of the criminal justice system my entire life. That really sucks. 3 strikes rule, all this stuff, like you're breaking apart families. You're creating instability in communities. And so for me, my why, and I think, it doesn't matter. Like it could be a medical reason, it could be a political reason, whatever. But mine is like giving opportunity to the people that were affected by this in our criminal justice system. And it's specifically like creating opportunity for myself and being able to live a stable life that I wasn't afforded as a kid. And then helping other people transition. There's probably all of us have a story about being in a gray market or, wanting to get into it. But the people that have been doing it, the people that set up grows early on, like helping them get into a place where they can now file their taxes and buy a house and get a car loan. So I think that's where you start. And once you figure that out, then you just do what you're good at. If you're good at growing weed, do that. If you're good at selling weed, do that.
I love it. I love it. Thanks for sharing as well. Yeah, I think to your earlier point about adult use markets and it can kind of lose some of the heart, or sometimes it can lose the why, right? And it is important to keep that in mind. I think the good news is that adult use markets can shine a brighter light on an industry. And when I say industry, I include legacy and regulated markets as well, but industry in air quotes. So it can shine a light on that group, which can then allow us, this normalization of medicine, normalization of some of the consumption and the use of cannabis, which I think is very, very important. And that's how we move forward all of us, like all of us, and how we keep medical with us as we go, because it's a big important thing, and it's actually a large kind of thesis of mine, is that medical actually nationally expands if I look at it in a long term, like if you widen out the bell curve, right? Like medical expands, there's a portion of it that actually gets really clinical, and that gets really big too. And some of it gets really, dark, evil empire, pharma, and some of it, is actually useful to us. And so, and it also gets me to the, I think when I look at any, the whole cannabis sphere here in the United States and in North America, it's still really early. Like it seems like we're behind, and we're really early, and it sucks. And the good news is, we get to make a lot of shit up. Okay, so we get to be creative, flex creative muscles, and there's still time for things like diversity, inclusivity, I think social justice causes and things like that. There's still time. We're not so far down the train tracks that we can't, roll these things into our standard everyday business practices. And so if I'm setting up a cannabis company in Minnesota, I would do a Venn diagram of, here's all the stuff I like to do, right? Like, do I like to, whatever it is. And then here's the things that I'm good at. And in that middle spot, in that sweet spot, that's where I start to develop my more detailed business plan, right? So if I want to produce the best, wellness product, or the best social adult use product for blah, 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 and I get really specific about that, but I'm not good at cultivating, then don't do that. Find somebody who is, get their product or products, and then find your niche. It could be retail, it could be delivery, it could be e-com, it could be the things that support the industry, right? Like it could be the genetics, or the supplies and testing, and tech, and there's so many different areas. And then as I start to develop that business plan, I probably would add a third circle to the Venn diagram of here are all the things that need to happen. And a lot of it is regulatory BS that also carries with it overhead. And it's sort of there's no choice but to be in the regulated legal market. There's no choice but to be compliant, or you will at some point get shut down, right? So, how do I meet those testing standards? How do I budget for that, right? How do I get all of these different required components? And so you have to start listing that out, and then that helps you develop your budget, where your retail shop is not $100,000, kind of flip of an old Starbucks space. It's it's $100,000 in cameras and freaking card access readers before the walls go up, right? And everything else. So yeah, that's kind of how I would start to go about it. And then you get to keep your why as you go into it.
So one of the questions, and I'm going to do this because you're the only two people that are standing in the room. One of the questions that I have is how to survive. So we do business all over the world. And if you asked me to make a list of 25 profitable cannabis companies, I can't do it. That's crazy. And the only people in the game that are getting their piece consistently are the government. So before I completely digress into a complaint, you were appointed by the governor to be on the Cannabis Advisory Council. That's one thing you didn't mention, and you're very humble. You missed that. That's kind of a big deal. So and I don't know, are either of you on the governor's panel? Okay, fine. Neither am I. So you're the only guy. So let's talk about that for a minute and about input and responsiveness from, I won't use the word jackboot, but how do we impact, or how do we interact effectively with, I mean, I really appreciate the fact that you're on that committee. That's a really big deal for us. So please tell us how that's going to help us.
I wish I was as optimistic as you are, or at least as you sound. We first and foremost, let me say there is a part of me that believes maybe this plant isn't meant to thrive in a regulated environment. That's a core belief of mine to an extent. I think the nature and the history of this plant, it is an outlaw in itself. It comes from a counterculture. Maybe it's not supposed to be regulated, and we're learning that now. I don't know. But I think if you look at MSOs and the way that their projections look, that may be exactly what's happening. When it comes back to this committee and this advisory council, I can tell you we've only had one official meeting since this was made legal a year ago. One meeting. Now, you've all been watching the news, and you see update after update after update, and bill being passed or put through Congress after bill being put through Congress. We've had no input on any of that whatsoever in the last year. That's all been happening behind closed doors. It's all been happening by what some people would call stakeholders, but ultimately a stakeholder is someone that has placement or access to network or net worth that finds themselves a seat at this table. It's not indicative of the overall culture or people of Minnesota. It's just the stakeholders that have that P&A or placement and access. Again, we've only met that one time. And I can tell you that that one meeting that we had, none of us on the council actually had any input. It was more or less them telling us what they're doing, and that was it. So take that for what you will. Part of me still optimistic, and then there's a big part of me that thinks that, like other things in traditional government, that it's already done and it's just a box to be checked. And me saying that may very well get me removed from that council, but it just kind of is what it is.
So just for a little oxygen and a little increase in positivity about this subject, Jeremy and Colin, if you could identify the single greatest success story that you've been involved in the cannabis industry to date, if that's allowed, if you're allowed to make that testimony here today.
I don't know if I can say the single greatest one, but I can tell you some good stuff. And I'll say, Stephen, where you're at right now, I was sitting there in 2018, 2017, 2018 in Michigan going, this is great. We legalized. I'm so happy, but like, I'll never get mine. I'll be excluded. I don't have the money. I don't have the access. That wasn't the case. And I have two really good friends to thank for that felt totally different. They were like, we're going to find a way. We're going to get into the cannabis industry, and we're going to make it happen no matter what. And they made it happen. They showed me a path to also find my way in, which is super cool. And I think one of the cool things that Minnesota is doing is that a couple cool things, and it's still all up in the air. Everything could change. But one, it's not a limited license state. You're not going to end up like Illinois, where it's like lottery and only MSOs and all this like super restrictive stuff. It's unlimited licenses, and okay, maybe that's not totally accurate. Okay, you're on the grow side. I'm talking all licenses, retail, everything. Grow side's a little bit different. And then the other one on the retail side specifically, again, this might be different for grow, is that no local municipalities can opt out. Even in a state like Michigan, municipalities can opt out and say, we don't want grows, we don't want retail, we don't want delivery, all this stuff. And so then you have these, for a lack of a better term, like cannabis deserts where nobody can operate. And so then you have an entire town where they got to drive 15, 30 miles away to buy their cannabis. And then they miss out on tax revenue too, because they've opted out. So I I think there's a balance, and I think like I totally understand where you're coming from, but there's still opportunity and hope. And even if it's not plant touching, and sometimes plant touching is easier to operate in than plant touching, to be real with you guys. And I'll end it there with, you know, one of my biggest accomplishments so far in the cannabis industry, the legal cannabis industry, is when I left the retail side, I joined up with someone who is founding a technology company. This was close to 3 years ago, and we started to build a product that we cared about and we thought would make a difference in retailers' lives. We sold that company. I think the deal went through in February. We're now part of a larger company called Alpine IQ. And that was like, I mean, when I joined, they had one client. It was an MSO, Ascend Wellness, for those who are familiar with the MSO world. When we sold, we had like 340 plus clients in almost every legal state in the country. There were a few that we didn't have. I don't think we had like Alaska. Sorry, Alaska. But I mean, like that just shows you like it is possible. It is really hard. And if you don't have that good why, going back to that original question, like it's probably not worth it, because you probably will lose money at some point. I'm still not rich. I live in Ishpeming, Michigan, in the middle of the woods in an old mining town. But I like can pay for my life. I can file my taxes. I got a home loan. It's cool. There's some hope.
There is, yeah, there is. It's, yeah, I've definitely had this conversation with folks when we're looking at legislation in a number of different markets, that sometimes, like, unfortunately, the best bill is the bill that passes. And then and it comes with it a whole bunch of baggage. And then we try to move things, we find our way through it and try to modify it as we go, or influence as we go. Like rulemaking and then also interpretation of those rules can be like very powerful tools later on, like when we don't have access to certain legislative avenues. We can at least influence sometimes some of the regulatory bodies to like, hey, I know what you were trying to get at around this patient safety initiative. But it also means that we can no longer provide medicine because of this requirement. So let's change it and still achieve patient safety, right? Like we can have those conversations, and that's that's something. It gives me a little bit of hope. I think I can think of quite a few different kind of success stories in cannabis that I've been fortunate enough to be a part of, and they all look really different, because when I get involved with a cannabis group or someone that's just starting out, or they want to apply for a license, usually one of my first questions goes to their why. Like, well, what do you want to get out of it? I mean, do you want to like get the license and flip it, or do you want to get the license and run it and then sell, or to like retire yourself or your family member, or do you want to earn a steady income and take care of your family, or like what is it, right, that's driving this? And then that can also help kind of direct how you go about building your business, operating it, and eventually, if there is an exit, what that might look like, right? It might be the highest price, or it might be someone that is going to maintain, something very near and dear to you for years to come, right? So there have been a couple of those. There was a group in Virginia that actually, they were the only non-MSO license winner in the whole state of Virginia for medical, and it was very fortunate. It was an LGBTQ couple that one of them was a compounding pharmacist, and he had very passionate views about creating certain and specific medicines for the patient population. And they were also in like the southwest corner of Virginia, the very rural, kind of lower socioeconomic area. And so they did amazing things around like patient access and different like development of certain SKUs and products. And so I was really happy to see them succeed. And I've have a lot of other stories like that in other markets. So
then stay with you, Colin. If
Okay.
people that are watching want to connect with you, is there a efficient way to do that? I want to do that right back down the line.
Okay.
Is there an efficient way to be, or is it just this is our shot?
No. I would say, I get a lot of connection, quality connection on LinkedIn, I think is a great avenue. Because then we can kind of learn a little bit about each other and also then, start a communication dialogue, and see if there are ways that we can work together. And I'm also more than happy to, have any just open conversations about the industry with people, even if, I always think that we all do better when we all do better. So we can support each other, and there's enough room for everybody, quite frankly, to get theirs, to win.
To some degree. Some people win more than others.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. But there is room for everybody for the most part. Sometimes society kind of makes that difficult, but yeah. On my end, LinkedIn is like where I live, and it's if anybody is like, just looking at the cannabis industry, if you want to like learn from other people, LinkedIn is probably the most friendly towards cannabis right now. It seems super weird. I made one in like 2007 and then left it blank for like 10 years and then was like, oh shit, people are talking about weed on here. This is great. I'm going to be on LinkedIn again. So you can find me on LinkedIn. Otherwise, you can email works too. And I'm here. Like, I have family in Minnesota. I'm here a lot. I want to be involved in this role out here. It's exciting to me. But email is just jeremy.johnson, my first last name at alpineiq.com. So either LinkedIn or email works super easy.
So I want to clarify. I am optimistic about the industry here in Minnesota. Absolutely. I am not so optimistic about our input into how this thing gets rolled out is where the cutoff is, right? I'm not sure it's going to be everyone's best interest at heart moving forward, but the industry will be here. It will flourish. It'll go through the same ups and downs as every other state has. If we're talking non-MSO success stories, I think a good one for everyone to look at that has aspirations of being in this space is Fat Panda out of Washington. They are crushing it 320 million a year, doing really good revenue, small, not too diverse SKU lot numbers or products available on the shelves. There's ways to do this to be successful and keep that business and develop that, catchphrase, everyone, generational wealth, as everyone thinks that cannabis can develop for them. It's possible, right? Keeping in mind, there is a 97% failure rate within this space. 97%. So you can get in touch with me like these guys on LinkedIn, or feel free to shoot me an email at stefan@highendgeneticsmn.com.
Awesome. So now I get to digress into my passion play, and then we'll open it up for questions. I met a trimmer, Tim Delaney. He had just lost his wife to cancer, and I got into one of those conversations where you're just connected from the beginning of the conversation. And he said, we sold our soul when we went to adult use. And I said, what are you talking about? And he said, well, I got involved in this as a trimmer. He was an operator in the Middle East. And when he came back, he got involved as a trimmer because he wanted his ill wife to have access to medicine. And he wanted her to have access to the best medicine that they could find for her. And he accomplished that, and he ushered her to the door and was able to serve her up until her passing. He said, but what I learned in the process was we sold our soul when we went to adult use. And he said, that's really bad news. I said, yeah, Tim, but there's good news. I don't know if you've been paying attention, but there's such a thing as redemption in this world. And one of the things that could happen in this industry is all the stakeholders, from the investors to the regulators to the testing labs, to the cultivators and the license holders and so forth. Everybody could have a role in making a fund available for terminally ill patients to get free medicine. It's possible. So with that overly optimistic idea, I hope that as you go forth from Canna Connect, and this is all about connecting with people. So for the next 15 or 20 minutes, or almost 30 minutes that we have left, 28 minutes, let's rally some questions for these guys. There's a lot more here than just genetics. So I'm sorry if I sold you short on just genetics. A lot of experience in these three cats. So let's do some Q&A and see what they have to say. Yeah. Anybody?
So my question's a little it's not related to cannabis in general, but yeah, what do you see as industry trends for like design, like how you marketing it? You know, there's a lot of companies coming up. There's a lot of competition for packaging and ad design, and I'm not quite seeing like the pop culture of the 60s and 70s for cannabis yet. I'm just seeing a lot of kind of out of the box designing. So what do you guys see for that? As far as industry trends.
Go for it, Carlos.
I'll start.
We'll go ahead.
We'll go this way. Yeah, I mean, I have seen some of the 60s, 70s play, but not a lot, right? And some of it actually was early and almost a little lame, right? You know, like we're just gonna prop up on this thing, you know, and it usually was tie-dyed, even though they weren't tie-dye people. You just, you know, if you're a tie-dye person, wear tie-dye. Right. But I think there are a lot of brands. One, there are a lot of regulations on the branding itself. And so we're in a number of regulated markets, we're explicitly forbidden from making pop culture references. Anything that looks like a non-cannabis product or maybe references. And some of the wider, more popular kind of like references or collabs that you could do require some pretty hefty like licensing royalties as well. So a lot of times people haven't been able to quite, you know, bridge that because like, well, 97% of cannabis companies fail and it's really expensive. And so people will look at like the ROI of a lot of brands. And so a lot of people have been okay with producing a pretty decent aesthetic brand. But they don't need to do anything else right now. Right. And we're also very early in branding. Most brands marry with their consumers, right? They reach them outside of the retail environment, right? And they're around for a long time. So they're omni-channel, like they keep coming at them. And cannabis oftentimes can only advertise inside the retail four walls unless you have a digital genius over here, or unless you're really utilizing it's opening up, but we're really limited, right? There are ways now, but it's limited, and it took Coca-Cola and Nike a long time to make a brand for themselves. And I mean, even Apple took them a while as well, and a lot of money, and we're too early for that in a lot of cases. It is fun to see aesthetics. It's fun to see brands focus, like actually get focused and say, like, I'm speaking to this set of consumers and that's it, and not trying to be everything to everybody, right? And that's where we're seeing, I think, the leading edge of branding and aesthetics and design specifically.
Something that I think about a lot is that I think people forget that, and maybe this is just a personal theory of mine, and maybe, I don't know, I have no facts to back this up, but everybody smokes weed. It's not just like a 60s or 70s thing, or it's not just like a hip hop thing, or like you can't just pin it into one thing. Everybody smokes weed. And so I think that one reason why you don't see a lot of targeted branding is regulations, restrictions, all that. But like, Also, it's early and you can just open up a store, and this is not advice, like, but a lot of times you can just open up a store and people just show up and buy weed. It's pretty, yeah, it's pretty wild. People are just like, yeah, fuck yeah, like you're open, cool. So you don't have to do all that. And sometimes it's advantageous not to from the start, because you might pigeonhole yourself and you might not realize that your customer is actually not who you thought it was. So sometimes it's better and it's cheaper to not like go do it down a deep branding exercise right off the bat. You can like save a little bit of money, kind of feel things out. And then maybe you realize, you know what, I opened in some neighborhood that is like all about 60s and 70s or all about some other thing, and then niche down and do it. But it takes time to get there. It takes money. Apple, Nike, all these people, brand identity is not like overnight, unless you're like, it can be. I mean, you could just be like, I'm serving this customer, but then chances are you might be wrong. So it's a dangerous game to play.
I think Colin and Jeremy hit it on the head, right? You market towards your target demographic. I'm consulting with a company out of California now, and last week we sat in this 8-hour marketing branding exercise. It was horrible, absolutely horrible. But basically we are identifying locations that make $105,000 or more a year on an annual household income. Those are the people that we're targeting. They have the money to spend. Typically, those types of people don't want hippie tie-dye, peace signs, aliens type stuff in the stores. They want to feel more comfortable, more welcome. So we're going to make it look like an Aveda salon, because that's the target demographic, right? Not to say that the tie-dye hippie 70, 60 culture isn't viable. It's just not most targets demographic, because they're trying to make themselves a high market, high price, high value product. Does that make sense?
That was a genuine thing. It was an organic thing that happened because of culture at the time. So not getting that back, but how do we interpret that visually? What we all feel about the spiritual connection to it. But it makes sense what you're saying. Focus on the audience, and that's going to change that.
So just to be Canna Connect, right? It's about connecting. So say your name again. Todd Jurdy. And he's a design guy. He asked the question because he's a design guy. So if you need design consult, connect with Todd Jurdy. Yeah. So that's awesome. So you got a free plug out of the deal. The other question I have, and I'm sure there'll be more questions, but does anybody know how much Burner and Cookies made on their cannabis business this year? Anybody have a number off the tip of their tongue? Nothing. They made nothing. Tremendous cash flow, tremendous brand expense, but they didn't make anything. Burner's whole point in the interview that I read about the dynamics of having a brand that is that huge. I mean, Cookies is it's got to be one of the top. Is it the top? Culture brand, yeah. So to have a zero on the board as far as profitability, his whole point is to have this stuff in place for the next phase of the cannabis industry. He's making a tremendous margin on the lifestyle brand and on the clothing and on all the things that go with it. So it's not, but the whole point is his strategy isn't to make money in cannabis. His strategy is to make money in culture. And that's what he's doing. So I found that interesting. I hope you did too. Next question.
Kind of related to that, but where is all of that margin going towards? What's eating it up?
Metric tags. It's a joke, but metric tags, right? Compliance. If you any industry, QA QC is going to destroy revenue, right? Your quality assurance, quality check, like that is going to destroy it. Metric. Same thing, because you're dealing with metric tags, right? And you're dealing with compliance, subscription software, all that, like that stuff gets crazy expensive. Metric just upped their tag costs. Now it's like 41 or 47 cents a tag, went up almost 10 cents. So for every plant and every cycle, every product in every cycle, as it shifts, you're putting tags on these things. You can't renew these tags. So I know I have a company that was spending upwards of $1.6 million a year on tags, just tags, right? Like just so the state can monitor and regulate. And at the end of the day, I think traditional or legacy operators aren't used to dealing with all of these additional costs that come with regulation, right? Let alone the money that's coming with it.
Also, we touched on this earlier, but 280E, like you can't write off all of your, like on the retail side specifically that you asked about, you can't write off the pens, the paper, like all the business supplies that you buy for your dispensary. You cannot write that off like you can a normal business. So your margins get eaten up really quickly there. You can't write off employee benefits. So if you got 20 employees working at one retail store, like that's a huge expense you're taking on. Packaging, you can't write that. Like you don't have the same ability. And that's where you do see though, people come up with like creative solutions around that. You'll see holding companies for real estate, and then that becomes a tax write-off. You'll see people like mixing in like hemp with or CBD or apparel. You'll see them mixing in that, and then they can write off those expenses, which helps to offset all the other stuff that they're losing. So it's kind of difficult. It's hard.
Keep following up on that.
Yeah, Colin might have some good stuff.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Is the pricing strategy not baked into that then at the end when it at the point of sales is profit baked into that? Or is that just not?
Yes, yes and no. Yes and no. I mean,
Contextualize the question.
yeah. So he also asked about kind of pricing and are we setting, are the retailers then able to set a price that gives them some profitability, right? And you could, but you might also price yourself out of a business, right? Relative to the other folks in the market, because there are all these, like sometimes you have to pay an annual fee just as a business to have your license, and it's not like a $5,000 fee with like the county of Hennepin County or something. Like it's some of these larger, if you're vertical, if you have like a vertical license in some states, it's like hundreds of thousands of dollars every year, and then it's, so if you can bleed away stuff like that, like you have to, your Amazon Web Services for hosting all the security footage that you have to archive for 90 days when you have like 150 cameras, and it has to be color and it has to be a certain like deep resolution and everything. Like all of a sudden you're like, oh, I just spent 15 grand a month in like AWS, and then $20,000 on like, utilities. And then it just starts to go. And then, typically, right, we see a pretty volatile spot price index of like the flower itself and other, cultivation kind of derivatives. And a lot of it can be supply and demand. And, some of it is just sort of made up too. It's like, there's a lot of dynamics to it. And then, a lot of dispensaries will kind of like just keystone it. Like if they buy it for $50, they'll sell it for 100 or whatever it is, right? They just double it and that's going to give them, after their loyalty and other discounts, like a 43% gross margin probably.
Sometimes a lot lower.
Yeah.
If you're
Yeah. We try to hit 43. Yeah. As a gross margin for a dispensary, for a retail. And then, but from that, like you're going to hit a 28% EBITDA margin. And then after your taxes, you're going to be down to like a 7% positive free cash flow after taxes.
And then
Yeah.
the guy down the street is probably doing 20% margins because he wants volume. So that's what you're competing against.
Yeah. So
I think when was the last time you spent $80 on an eighth? And how often are you willing to do that?
Right.
It's just not-
it is a cash purchase too. So then they're like even debit card or whatever, it like definitely changes the nature of people's spending behavior and stuff too. Yeah. So it's tricky. I think dispensaries try to, but they also want to make sure that the product is accessible. And then the more dispensaries are around you, it's, retail it's kind of like you know, it's cutthroat. It's a knife fight in a ditch, you know? Yeah, with your eyes closed. So, good luck.
Well, thank you. That sounds promising. A knife fight in a ditch with your eyes closed. So would you rather be a dispensary or a producer?
I firmly believe you do what you're good at, and triple down on it, right? So I'm going to be a cultivator, period. I think you control the market by setting the pricing of the bulk product, gives you more room to play. I think other peoples will believe that there's the monies to be made at the dispensaries.
And all your weed is so good it sells out.
I think so.
Okay.
I'm out. So I think so.
Yeah, I mean, one, do what you're good at, but then two, it depends on the market. Like I'll say right now, if you're trying to be a craft cultivator in Minnesota, you're gonna have a hard time because you got Vireo, you got GTI, and they got massive canopy ready to go. Like you're gonna the price compression is gonna be insane from the start. So that maybe you can make it in the long run, but you have to like know your audience, dial in a brand, and you have to show value on the growing side. Even though retail is really hard, I would rather be there because I've always been a mediocre grower. I'm not very good at science. Probably failed a couple of science classes in school. So selling weed was way easier for me. So I would rather do that, but that's like what I'm good at. And I love selling weed online. So that's what I do. But I think to answer the question like wholly, I think it just depends on what market you're in, and you really have to look at it, because if I try to be unbiased about it, I would probably rather be a processor or a retailer in the state of Minnesota. But if you're GTI, you're probably like, yeah, this is great. I'm going to be supplying a, state of 6 million people with 3 or 4 borders that are illegal. And I have 2 of the biggest grow licenses in the state. Like that's a nice position to be in for those guys.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I would do what you're good at, right? Like go back to that Venn diagram of like what you like doing and what you're good at. And then also, I think I personally, like based on my Venn diagram, I'd probably end up, more somewhere in like production or retail. I still think retail can be a great business, and eventually 280 will, the tax code will go away, and all of a sudden you'll have probably one of the highest gross, net retail businesses around. So that's a good spot to be in. Yeah, and I think there's we were talking about this before we came up, but there's a self-awareness that's required to start and successfully operate a cannabis business. And there's self-awareness around yourself and what you're good at and what you're not. There's also self-awareness around also what the market will bear, right? So a lot of people, like I've never met the second best grower ever in a room or the world or anything, right? So a lot of people are like, oh my God, this is the best weed ever. It's the best. It might be like excellent product. It might be like really beautiful, right? But are people willing to pay extra for what you are providing? And that's a big question mark, right? So be really realistic about, what is the wholesale price of cannabis going to land on? Like what type of retail environment can I provide? What type of, I know I love these cookies, but gummies outsell cookies like 12 to 1. So, like if you're thinking about, it was like, oh, I'm going to do all these confections. And I'm like, that's great for the 7 people that are going to buy it. Like do your homework and then get real, because some of it feels a little bit like a gut punch, because like your dream just gets crushed and you just come up with a new dream. Sorry, I'm gonna keep going here. Yeah, look, I will often say too, like in cannabis, my experience has been, tell me if you're right, gentlemen, but like a wrong decision is better than a no decision. And that also requires your feedback loop to be extremely short. So make a decision on Monday, and it's not next month or next quarter. It's like next Monday, evaluate how it's going. And I had a big whiteboard in my office, and Jackson, you've seen the whiteboard, and it has 2 columns, and one is like, do that again. And the other one is dumb shit, don't do that again. Yeah. And like every Monday, add to the lists, and like whatever's in that do that again column, like keep going. I mean, like we converted an abandoned shopping mall in that Virginia project. And I like was driving a forklift around an old JC Penney, like setting up a cultivation. And like, it's just what you do, you know, keep going, keep going.
So when you were talking about what to do in the industry to be successful, my brain went back to how much I would have loved to have gotten paid to smoke weed. It would be a great job, but still you keep scrolling. I could show you how to do this, but you keep scrolling. That's what I keep seeing on the social media these days. Our business is blowing up, but it's weird. We sell a little, in case you forgot, we sell little bags of water that keep cannabis fresh. There's all these new markets. There's all this new legalization. There's all this exciting news and anticipation about federal legalization, which I think is going to be a nightmare before it's a dream. Okay. But there's all these new markets. There's all these new consumers. There's all this new territory. So we're growing in this direction. But we go to California and the attrition in California is ridiculous. We go to Canada. It was a great market until they burned all the investor cash. And then the government has no real interest in the industry surviving or expanding. So there's all this attrition and all this wreckage in the rearview mirror. But there's all this new, and Minnesota's right in the middle of new right now. And the only comprehension I have about what's going on at retail in Minnesota, other than the low dose market, is the indigenous dispensaries. Is there anything else going on in Minnesota right now besides the indigenous dispensaries? Yeah. Yeah, legally. Yeah, I appreciate that. As we went through, you keep qualifying that. Yeah. So can you talk to the opportunity for the indigenous community in Minnesota? Yeah, can you?
I can.
Steve Eigenman. Hey, this is the coordinator of your Canna Connect event.
So I'm happy to announce that the Minnesota Cannabis College has a new partnership coming out with Native Care and Red Lake Nation. What's unique about Native Care is they're a nonprofit. And so we are going to see a nonprofit approach to cannabis. And they're able to work in Minneapolis, and they need jobs in Minneapolis. They need training to get people up to Red Lake. They have a deficit of job work of employees. And so they're interested in getting the market trained to provide jobs. I mean, there are big canopies coming up on the native dispensary side, massive, right? And so their number one concern is, how do we get training to fuel this industry?
That's great.
And you're working.
Yeah. Do you want to speak to it, Colin?
Oh, I think, I think that there's a great opportunity for indigenous cultivation, particularly, right? Because like I think the point was made earlier that, you know, with the switch over to the two MSOs that are two medical licensees that are currently operating in the state, have an advantage of having, you know, stock. They have canopy. They also have products and SKUs and things developed. And I think all of the different tribes in Minnesota have this great opportunity to, you know, take a strong position leading into adult use where they could provide, everything from biomass to flower to other products, manufactured products. And it's amazing. It's a great, like, that's the good news about, you know, I think the opportunity ahead of us. There's a lot of employment opportunity that's involved in that, and I think that's important. And it's not necessarily a flash in the pan, right? Because they're going to be able to come in, they'll be able to sustain the price compression that eventually happens in the market, and they'll be active, market participants probably long run. They have a much better likelihood percentage likelihood of success and health long term. So it's a great opportunity. Yeah, it's a good thing to support too.
So I got a big thank you for you, Steve, for putting on Canna Connect and giving us this opportunity to spend the day together. Hope you found it useful and informative. These guys will hang around for a few minutes if you want to approach them personally and continue your line of questioning. But thank you, Stefan Egan. Thank you, Jeremy Johnston. Thank you, Colin Kelly. And that's a wrap for Canna Connect today.
Thanks to Matt Adams from Boveda. Jordan Witt from Captain Depot. The sound effects.
I should have given you.